The words hit me like ice water. Today she's gone, Melissa whispered with a smile that never reached her eyes, her manicured fingers digging into my son's arm as the organ music swelled around us. I stood there in my peach mother-of-the-groom dress, pearl earrings catching the stained glass light, while something cold and terrible unfolded in my chest. No one else heard it. Not the pastor with his benevolent smile, not my Thomas looking at his bride with pure adoration, not the 200 guests dabbing happy tears. Only I knew what those 4 words truly meant. She wasn't talking about leaving her maiden name behind or her parents' home. She was talking about me. And as I watched her triumphant eyes, I realized I'd invited a predator into our family and handed her the keys to everything I loved. I never told anyone what she whispered that day. Not even when they changed the locks on my own house 3 weeks later. Not even when I found myself standing in the rain at 60 years old, with nowhere to go, clutching my dead husband's watch and a photo album as my only possessions. But I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you how I survived it. Because sometimes the deed to your life isn't just a piece of paper, it's the truth that saves you when someone tries to erase you from your own story. I wasn't always this wise, believe me. Before all this happened, I was just Eleanor, Ellie, 2 friends, a widow of 5 years living in the same 4-bedroom colonial in Oak Ridge, the estates that Richard and I had bought when Thomas was just learning to walk. Richard had been gone since 2018, a sudden heart attack at 66 that left me bewildered and alone, but not destitute. He'd been smart with money. My Richard behalf, the house was paid off. There was a decent life insurance policy, and my teacher's pension meant I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had my garden club on Thursdays, my book club on Tuesdays, and I volunteered teaching ESL at the community center 3 afternoons a week. My life had rhythm, if not passion. I had purpose, if not excitement. Thomas was my only child, my miracle baby. After years of trying, he'd grown into the kind of son mothers brag about, handsome, kind, with a good job as a systems engineer at Meridian Tech. At 32, he lived about 40 minutes away in a downtown apartment, close enough for Sunday dinners but far enough for his own life. We had one of those easy relationships where silence was comfortable and laughter came quick. After Richard died, Thomas checked on me more often, called every other day, brought his laundry over sometimes just so I'd have company while he used my washer and dryer. "Mom, you know you're the only woman who gets my socks right," he'd joke. But we both knew it was his way of making sure I wasn't alone too much. When he told me he was dating someone new, I was genuinely happy for him. "Her name is Melissa," he said, forking up the pot roast I'd made that Sunday in March. "She's incredible, Mom, smart, ambitious. She's in pharmaceutical sales, travels a lot." His eyes had that shine, the one I recognized from when Richard used to look at me. "I think you're really going to like her." I can still see him sitting there at my kitchen table, the spring light making patterns on the tablecloth, his father's smile breaking across his face. I had no reason to doubt it would be anything but wonderful. Another person to love my son, another person for me to welcome. When you've lived, as long as I have, you learn that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to keep close. I was ready to make room in my heart for whoever made my Thomas happy. Melissa was striking, that's the first word that comes to mind. Not traditionally beautiful, but the kind of woman who commands attention when she enters a room. Tall, with sleek dark hair cut in an expensive bob, always perfectly styled. Her clothes were tailored and clearly costly designer brands I recognized from magazines but would never splurge on myself. When Thomas brought her to dinner for the first time in April, she arrived with an orchid plant and a bottle of wine that I later discovered cost over $200. "Just a little something," she'd said, air-kissing my cheek. "Thomas talks about you constantly." She smelled of something subtle and expensive, and her handshake was firm, professional, confident. I remember how she looked around my home with those shrewd dark eyes. "What a charming place," she said, running her finger along my mantelpiece where family photos sat in mismatched frames. So much history. Something in her tone made me straighten my blouse, suddenly aware of the slightly outdated decor, the comfortable but worn furniture. For the first time in years, I saw my home through a stranger's eyes. Later, when I showed her around the garden I'd spent years cultivating, she nodded politely, but kept glancing at her phone. "Hydrangeas," she'd said absently. When I pointed out my prized blue blooms, My grandmother grew those too. The comment stung slightly, like she was relegating my passion to something quaint and elderly. Still, I brushed it aside. Not everyone loves gardening, I told myself. And she was clearly making Thomas happy. His eyes barely left her all evening. That night, after they'd gone, I sat on my porch swing with a cup of tea and told myself I was being silly. Of course, there would be an adjustment period. Of course it would take time to develop a relationship with the woman my son was falling for. But something lingered, a scent like ozone before a storm. I just couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me. When I called my friend Diane the next day, she laughed at my concerns. "You're just being a mama bear, Ellie. No woman is good enough for our boys, right? Give her a chance." I decided she was right. I would make more of an effort. Their relationship moved quickly. By June, Thomas was talking about Melissa moving into his apartment. By August, they were engaged. "I know it seems fast, Mom," he'd said over the phone, his voice giddy with happiness. "But when you know, you know. Dad proposed to you after 5 months. Remember?" He was right, of course. Richard had swept me off my feet in a whirlwind romance back in 1984. Who was I to judge? So I threw myself into being supportive, offered to host an engagement dinner, asked about wedding plans, started setting aside money to contribute. Thomas had always been sensible. If he was sure about Melissa, then I would trust his judgment. The engagement dinner was at my house, a gathering of close family and friends to celebrate. I'd spent days preparing, cleaning, cooking Thomas's favorite foods, even repainting the guest bathroom. I wanted everything to be perfect. When they arrived, Thomas hugged me tight. "Thanks for doing this, Mom," he whispered. "It means a lot." Melissa was wearing a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, diamond studs glittering in her ears. The ring on her finger was stunning, a large emerald-cut diamond that caught the light whenever she moved her hand, which was often. "Eleanor," she said, using my full name despite my repeated invitations to call me Ellie. "You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble." But her eyes said something different as they swept over the buffet I'd prepared. Later, I overheard her tell her friend, "It's cute, right? So, homie, we'll have to do something about this place, eventually. Do something about this place." I stood frozen in my hallway, plates in hand, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Melissa's friend had laughed. "Good luck with the mother-in-law sweet conversion. My mom fought us on that for years." I didn't hear Melissa's response because my brother-in-law called me from the living room. But those words echoed in my head all night. Mother-in-law sweet conversion. This was my home, paid for with decades of Richard's and my hard work. What exactly were they planning? I didn't bring it up that night. I told myself I was misunderstanding, that they probably meant helping me update some things, maybe modernize the kitchen like Thomas had suggested last year. Besides, it was their celebration, and I didn't want to cause a scene. So I smiled and served the cake and accepted congratulations on my future daughter-in-law. But that night, after everyone had gone, I sat in Richard's old armchair and felt a strange uneasiness settle over me. "Am I being paranoid, Rich?" I whispered to his photo. As always, his kind eyes stared back, offering no answers. But for the first time since his death, I felt truly alone, in a way that ached deep in my bones. The wedding planning took on a life of its own. Despite my offers to help, Melissa made it clear she had definite ideas about what she wanted. "We're thinking the Westbrook Hotel, Mom," Thomas told me. "Melissa has always dreamed of getting married there." The Westbrook was the most exclusive venue in our area, with a price tag to match. When I gently asked about the budget, Thomas waved away my concerns. "Melissa's parents are helping, and I've got savings." What he didn't say, but what I later discovered, was that he'd emptied the investment account Richard had set up for him and taken out a substantial loan. The wedding Melissa wanted would cost over $60,000. I tried to maintain a relationship with Melissa during those months, inviting her for lunch, offering to go dress shopping. She was always too busy, or had already made plans with her mother or friends. When I did see her, at dinners or family gatherings, she was perfectly pleasant in front of Thomas, but oddly cold when he wasn't looking. Once, I brought over some homemade soup when she had a bad cold. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd said, barely opening the door. "That's so traditional. I'm on a cleanse, actually. Doctor's orders. But Thomas can have it." She took the container with 2 fingers like it might contaminate her, and quickly said goodbye. I stood on their apartment landing, hearing the deadbolt click, feeling foolish and somehow very old. As the wedding approached, I noticed Thomas calling less frequently. When I called him, Melissa often answered, explaining that he was busy, in the shower, or had just stepped out. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. "They're just busy with wedding stuff," Diane reassured me. "Once they settle down, things will go back to normal." I wanted to believe her, but there was a distance growing between my son and me that I didn't understand, a coldness creeping in like early frost on my garden. I'll never forget the day I stopped by his apartment unannounced. Something I rarely did because I was in the area and had some paperwork he'd asked me to sign for his health insurance. Melissa answered the door in yoga clothes, her face registering surprise and something else, annoyance, maybe even anger. "Eleanor, we weren't expecting you." Behind her, I could see Thomas at their dining table, head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Mom," he said, standing quickly. "Is everything okay?" There was tension in the air, so thick I could taste it. "I just brought those papers," I said, suddenly feeling like an intruder. Melissa stepped aside reluctantly, and as I entered, I noticed her shoot Thomas a warning look. They'd clearly been arguing over dinner that night at my empty house. I turned it over in my mind. Had they been fighting about me, the wedding, money? I remembered the old saying about not getting between a man and his wife, but she wasn't his wife yet, and I was his mother. Surely I had a right to worry when something seemed wrong. 2 weeks before the wedding, Thomas called with an unexpected request. "Mom, Melissa and I were talking. After the wedding, things are going to be tight with the loan payments and rent. We were wondering, how would you feel about us moving in with you for a while, just until we get on our feet financially?" The question caught me off guard. My 4-bedroom house certainly had space. Thomas's old room and 2 guest rooms stood empty most of the time, but something about the request set off warning bells. "What about your apartment lease?" I asked. "We're not renewing," he explained. "It's up the month after the wedding anyway." I hesitated, thinking of Melissa's comment about doing something to my house, the conversation about a mother-in-law suite, but this was my son asking for help. And what kind of mother would I be to refuse? "Of course you can stay here," I said finally, "for as long as you need." The relief in his voice was palpable, and it warmed me to think I could help them start their married life without financial strain. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best. We'll talk details after the honeymoon." "Okay." After we hung up, I walked through those empty bedrooms, thinking about having life in the house again. Maybe this would be good for all of us. Maybe Melissa and I would become closer once we were under the same roof. Maybe this was exactly what we all needed. I spent the next 2 days cleaning out closets, freshening linens, and making space. I even bought new towels for their bathroom and a welcome basket with Melissa's favorite chocolates. Information I'd pried from Thomas months ago. I wanted them to feel welcome, to see that I was trying. The wedding day arrived, September 15th, a perfect early autumn Saturday at the Westbrook Hotel. The ballroom was transformed with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers, just as Melissa had wanted. The guest list had somehow swelled to over 200 people, many of whom I'd never met. I wore the peach dress I'd bought specially, had my hair done for the first time in years, even splurged on professional makeup. I wanted to look my best for Thomas, to make him proud. Richard would have been so handsome in a tuxedo. Beside me, I thought as I sat alone in the front row designated for parents, Melissa's large family filled several rows on the other side, her mother resplendent in designer silk, her father stern in his custom tuxedo. When Thomas appeared at the altar, handsome and nervous in his black tux, my heart swelled with love and pride. My little boy, all grown up and getting married. Despite my reservations about Melissa, despite the distance that had grown between us, I was genuinely happy for him. In that moment, the music swelled, the doors opened, and there she was, Melissa, a vision in a gown that must have cost thousands. Her dark hair swept up, her smile triumphant as she glided down the aisle on her father's arm. Thomas's face when he saw her, oh, the pure love there, brought tears to my eyes. Whatever my concerns, he adored her, and that had to be enough. The ceremony was beautiful, traditional. When it came time for the mother of the groom to be acknowledged, I stood and lit the unity candle as rehearsed. Melissa's smile remained fixed as I approached the altar, but when I leaned in to adjust her bouquet slightly, It was tilting, about to drop a rose. She gripped my wrist. Not visibly, not enough for anyone to notice, but her fingers dug into my skin as she whispered those words that would haunt me. Today she's gone. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes were cold. I stepped back, confused and hurt, returning to my seat with my heart pounding. What did she mean? Who was gone? As the ceremony continued, as vows were exchanged and rings placed, I sat there trying to make sense of her words. It was only later, at the reception, when I overheard her tell a bridesmaid, the house needs a complete overhaul, that old lady decor has to go, that the pieces started to fall into place. She wasn't talking about leaving her maiden name behind. She wasn't talking about leaving her parents' home. She was talking about me. About erasing me from my own home, from my son's life. The realization was like a physical blow. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood there in my peach dress, staring at my reflection. A woman in her 60s with carefully applied makeup and a stunned expression, trying to comprehend that her new daughter-in-law had just declared war. But why? What had I ever done to her except welcome her and love my son? I splashed water on my wrists, took deep breaths, and told myself I was overreacting. Surely, I was misinterpreting things. This was stress and wedding nerves talking. Everything would settle once they returned from their honeymoon. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in the Maldives, another extravagance I later learned they'd put on credit cards while they were gone. I prepared for their arrival, making sure the rooms were perfect, stocking the kitchen with foods they liked, even buying a small welcome home gift. I was determined to make this work, to build a relationship with Melissa for Thomas's sake. They arrived home late on a Sunday, exhausted from travel but tanned and seemingly happy. Thomas hugged me tight. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he said, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Melissa surveyed the house with those calculating eyes but thanked me for the welcome basket. That night, I made dinner for us all, and we sat at the kitchen table like a family. Thomas showed me honeymoon photos on his phone, and Melissa even laughed at one of my mild jokes. I went to bed thinking maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The changes began subtly. First, it was small comments about the house. "This wallpaper is so dated, don't you think, Eleanor?" Or, "These curtains really don't let in enough light." Then came suggestions. "We should redo the kitchen while we're here." Thomas and I would contribute. Of course, I tried to be accommodating. After all, they were living there to now. When Melissa suggested repainting the living room a more modern color, agreed, though the soft yellow had been Richard's favorite. When she wanted to rearrange the furniture, I helped move things around. I was trying so hard to be the cool, easygoing mother-in-law, but it never seemed enough. 3 weeks after they moved in, I came home from my ESL class to find workers in my kitchen. Not just workers, demolition crew. My 1990s oak cabinets were being ripped out, the countertops already gone, the floor covered in protective plastic. I stood in the doorway, grocery bags in hand, speechless. "Oh good, you're home." Melissa appeared, clipboard in hand, looking sleek and professional in a business suit. "What do you think? The contractors can finish by next week if they push." I stared at the destruction of my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd taught Thomas to bake cookies, where Richard and I had shared thousands of meals, where all our family holidays had centered. I didn't approve this, I managed to say. Melissa's smile didn't waver. "Thomas signed off on it this morning. It's going to look amazing. Quartz countertops, custom cabinets. It'll add so much value to the house." I found Thomas in the garage, going through boxes. "Thomas, what's happening to my kitchen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, surprised. "The renovation. Melissa said you two discussed it last week." I shook my head. "We talked about maybe painting the cabinets, not tearing everything out. This will cost thousands." Thomas's face clouded. "Mom, I thought you were on board. Melissa said you agreed but wanted us to handle the details since you're busy with your volunteer work." He ran a hand through his hair, looking distressed. "The contracts are signed. We can't stop it now." I felt a cold realization settle in my stomach. She had lied to him, deliberately, and somehow, I had to find a way to tell my son that his new wife was manipulating him without seeming like the jealous, possessive mother she was painting me to be. "Who's paying for this renovation?" I asked quietly. Thomas looked uncomfortable. "We are, well, mostly." We were hoping you could contribute since it's your house and it will increase the value. I felt dizzy. How much? He named a figure that made my knees weak. $30,000 for a complete kitchen overhaul. Money I didn't have unless I dipped into my retirement savings. Thomas, I can't afford that. And I didn't want this renovation in the first place. His expression hardened slightly. Mom, you've been talking about updating the kitchen for years. Melissa is just making it happen. I thought you'd be grateful. The conversation ended with tension hanging between us. The first real tension we'd ever had. That night, I heard them arguing behind their closed door, voices rising and falling. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were fighting about me, about the kitchen. I felt sick with worry and, for the first time, genuine fear about what was happening in my home. The kitchen renovation was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa began moving my things without asking, relegating family photos to closets, replacing them with modern art she'd selected. My comfortable throw pillows disappeared, replaced with decorative ones that looked beautiful but were uncomfortable to use. The reading chair that had been Richard's, where I sat every evening, was moved to the basement to make room for a sleek chaise lounge that Melissa said opened up the space. Each time I objected, she would look surprised. But, Eleanor, we discussed this, don't you remember? And each time, Thomas would look between us, increasingly frustrated. Mom, if you're having memory problems, we should get that checked, he said after one such incident. The suggestion stunned me into silence. Was I losing my mind? Was I forgetting conversations we'd had? I began to doubt myself, to keep careful notes of what was said and when. But it didn't matter. Melissa always had an explanation, always had Thomas believing her version of events. She was systematically erasing me from my own home, painting me as forgetful, difficult, resistant to change. And my son, my Thomas, who had always been so close to me, was pulling away, looking at me with concern and disappointment rather than love and understanding. I'll never forget the day I came home to find my garden had been professionally landscaped while I was at my book club. My carefully tended perennials, my hydrangeas, that had taken years to establish, my herb garden, all gone, replaced with what the landscaper called low-maintenance, modern plantings. I stood there in the yard. I no longer recognized and wept openly. Mom, they're just plants, Thomas said that evening when I confronted them. The old garden was overgrown and dated. This looks so much cleaner. Melissa stood beside him, hand on his arm, face a mask of concern. Eleanor, we talked about this last month. You said you were finding the garden too much work for you now. We're just trying to help. I stared at her, this woman who was gaslighting me in my own home, who was turning my son against me with her lies. I never said that, I replied, my voice shaking. I love my garden. I've spent years cultivating those plants. Melissa exchanged a look with Thomas, one that clearly said, see what I mean? She's forgetting things. Thomas sighed heavily. Mom, please don't make this difficult. Melissa is trying so hard to make this place nice. For all of us. That night, I called Diane in tears. Ellie, this isn't right, she said after I explained everything. They're taking over your house without permission. You need to put your foot down. But how could I? Every time I tried to assert myself, Melissa twisted it to make me seem unreasonable, forgetful, stuck in the past. And Thomas, my sweet boy, was so under her spell that he couldn't see what was happening, or didn't want to see. I'm going to talk to my lawyer, I told Diane. Just to understand my options. The house was in my name alone. Richard had made sure of that. Legally, they couldn't make changes without my permission. But proving that I hadn't given permission when Melissa insisted I had, that was becoming increasingly difficult. The next day, I made an appointment with Richard's old attorney, Harold Freeman, for the following week. Just knowing I was taking action gave me strength. That weekend I stood my ground when Melissa suggested updating my bedroom. No, I said firmly. This room stays as is. She smiled that cold smile. Of course, Eleanor. Whatever you want. But there was something calculating in her eyes that made me uneasy. That night, I put a small lock on my bedroom door. Nothing obvious, just a sliding bolt on the inside. I felt ridiculous doing it, like a teenager afraid of her parents snooping. But I no longer felt safe in my own home. I needed one space that was still mine. Monday morning, I left for my ESL class as usual. When I returned that afternoon, the locks on the front door had been changed. My key wouldn't work. I stood on my own porch, trying my key again and again, a sense of panic rising. Finally, I rang the doorbell. Melissa answered, looking surprised. Eleanor, did you forget your key? I held it up. It's not working. She frowned. Oh, that's right. Thomas had the locks changed this morning. There was an attempted break-in on Maple Street, and he was worried about security. He was supposed to leave a new key for you. She disappeared inside, returning a moment later with a key. Here you go. Sorry about that. It completely slipped my mind to tell you. I took the key, thanked her stiffly, and went inside. The house smelled different, some expensive candle burning that wasn't mine. In the kitchen, where the renovation was nearly complete, I noticed a stack of mail on the counter. My mail, already opened. I sorted it for you, Melissa said, following my gaze. Just bills and junk. I picked up the pile, bank statements, insurance notices, a letter from my sister in Florida, all opened. I preferred to open my own mail, I said quietly. Melissa shrugged. Just trying to help. You've seemed so overwhelmed lately. That word, overwhelmed, was becoming a common refrain. According to Melissa, I was overwhelmed by the house, by my volunteer work, by life in general, the implication being that I was no longer capable of managing on my own. That night, I went through my opened mail carefully. Everything seemed in order, except my bank statement showed a withdrawal of $5,000 that I hadn't made. I stared at the entry, dated the previous week, trying to remember if I'd moved money around. I hadn't, I was certain. With shaking hands, I called the bank's after-hours line. Yes, Mrs. Stevenson, that withdrawal was made in person at our main branch, the representative told me, with your ID and signature. But I hadn't been to the bank in over a month. I hung up, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Someone had withdrawn money from my account, someone with access to my ID, my mail, my personal information, someone who could forge my signature. The next morning, I waited until both Thomas and Melissa left for work before I began searching. I felt like a criminal in my own home, looking through drawers and closets, trying to find evidence of what? Theft, fraud, gaslighting in their bedroom. My old guest room now transformed with expensive bedding and modern furniture. I found nothing incriminating, but in Thomas's office, tucked in a desk drawer, I found bank statements. Their joint account showed recent large deposits, one for $5,000, exactly the amount missing from my account, and there were credit card statements in Thomas's name, showing massive debt, over $120,000, the honeymoon, the wedding, the renovations, designer clothes, expensive dinners. They were drowning in debt. And in a folder labeled house, I found something that made my blood run cold. Printouts of real estate listings, information on reverse mortgages, a draft document that looked like a property transfer, with my name and Thomas's on it. They weren't just renovating my house, they were planning to take it from me, use it to pay off their debts. My hands shook so badly I could barely refold the papers and return them to their place. I needed to get out, to think, to plan. I grabbed my purse and a few personal items, locked my bedroom, and left. In my car, I sat for several minutes, breathing deeply, trying to calm myself. This couldn't be happening. My own son wouldn't steal from me, wouldn't try to take my home. But the evidence was right there in black and white. I drove to Diane's house, barely seeing the road through my tears. She took one look at me on her doorstep and pulled me inside. Ellie, what happened? I told her everything. The changed locks, the opened mail, the missing money, the documents I'd found. Diane's face grew grimmer. With each revelation, you need to call Harold right now, she said, referring to my lawyer. Not next week. Today. She was right. This had gone beyond family disagreement into potential elder abuse and fraud. The thought made me physically ill. How had it come to this? How had I lost my son to this woman who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to her financial salvation? Harold Freeman had been Richard's attorney for decades and had helped settle his estate after his death. When I called his office and explained the situation, his secretary put me through immediately. Mrs. Stevenson, this sounds very concerning, he said after I'd explained everything. Are you safe? The question startled me. Safe, from my own son. I'm at my friend's house, I assured him. But I'm worried about going back home. Harold was silent for a moment. Don't go back alone, he finally said. In fact, If you can stay with your friend for a few days, that might be best while we figure this out. I'll need to see those documents you mentioned and get a formal statement from you. And we should contact the bank about the fraudulent withdrawal. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? That night, I slept fitfully on Diane's guest bed, my phone buzzing repeatedly with texts from Thomas. Mom, where are you? We're worried. Mom, please call me back. Mom, Melissa says you seemed confused this morning. Are you okay? I didn't answer. I couldn't talk to him yet, not until I had sorted through my thoughts and spoken with Harold. The next morning, Diane drove me to the lawyer's office. Harold listened carefully as I detailed everything that had happened since the wedding, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. Mrs. Stevenson, Ellie, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of elder exploitation. The isolation from friends and support networks, the gaslighting to make you doubt your memory and judgment, the financial manipulation, and the fact that they're looking into property transfers without your knowledge is deeply concerning. He shuffled through the notes he'd taken. The good news is that the house is solely in your name. They cannot legally sell it or take out a reverse mortgage without your consent. The bad news is that they've already begun financial exploitation with the unauthorized bank withdrawal. We need to act quickly to protect you and your assets. Harold outlined a plan. First, secure my finances by changing all passwords and notifying the bank of potential fraud. Second, document everything that had happened with dates and details. Third, prepare for a potential confrontation where I would need to ask them to leave my home. And fourth, be ready to involve adult protective services if necessary. This won't be easy, Ellie, he warned. Thomas may not react well. He may not believe that Melissa is manipulating him. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my son, about the little boy who used to climb into my lap for stories, the teenager who defended me fiercely when neighborhood gossips questioned my parenting after Richard worked late too often, the young man who'd held my hand at his father's funeral and promised to always take care of me. Was I prepared to potentially lose him in order to save myself? The answer hurt, but it was clear. I have to try, I told Harold, even if he hates me for it. That afternoon, Harold accompanied me to my bank, where I reported the fraudulent withdrawal and changed all my account information. The bank manager was sympathetic and concerned. Mrs. Stevenson, we can flag your accounts for extra verification requirements, she offered. And we've initiated an investigation into the withdrawal. If someone impersonated you, we have security footage from that day. I thanked her, feeling a small sense of control returning. Next, Harold drove me home to my house, that no longer felt like mine, so I could collect more of my belongings. We timed it for when both Thomas and Melissa would be at work. But as we pulled into my driveway, I saw Thomas's car parked there. He should be at work, I murmured, suddenly nervous. Harold placed a reassuring hand on my arm. I'll come in with you. You have every right to enter your own home and collect your things. We approached the front door, and I used my new key to open it. The sound of voices came from the kitchen, Thomas and Melissa arguing. I hesitated in the hallway, Harold beside me. I'm telling you, she's not well, Melissa was saying, her voice sharp. We need to talk about assisted living options. She's becoming paranoid, forgetful. It's not safe for her to live alone, and I can't be expected to be her caretaker. That's not what I signed up for. Thomas's voice was strained. She's my mother, Melissa. This is her house. We can't just ship her off somewhere. Melissa's tone turned wheedling. Baby, we've talked about this. Your mom needs professional care, and we need to think about our future. This house, once it's renovated, could sell for enough to clear our debts and give us a fresh start. It's what your dad would want, for you to be financially secure. I felt sick listening to them discuss me, my future, my home, as if I were already gone, as if I had no say. Harold's face was grim as he gently pulled me toward the door. Let's go, he whispered. We'll come back with a police escort if necessary. But it was too late. Thomas had heard us. He appeared in the hallway, his face registering shock at seeing me with a stranger. Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick. His eyes moved to Harold, suspicion dawning. Who's this? I straightened my shoulders, finding strength in Harold's presence. This is Harold Freeman, Dad's attorney, and my attorney. Thomas's expression darkened. You brought a lawyer to our house. What's going on? Melissa appeared behind him, her face a careful mask of concern. Eleanor, we've been so worried. Are you okay? You seem confused lately. I'm not confused, Melissa, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I know exactly what's happening. I know about the $5,000 taken from my account. I know about the plans to sell my house. Thomas's face paled. Mom, what are you talking about? But there was something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or shame, that told me he knew exactly what I meant. Melissa stepped forward, placing a hand on Thomas's arm. Eleanor, this is exactly what we're concerned about. These paranoid accusations, these misunderstandings. You're not well, and we're worried about you. Her voice was perfectly calibrated to sound caring while painting me as mentally unstable. Harold stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. Mrs. Anderson, he addressed Melissa formally. I have documentation of funds removed from Mrs. Stevenson's account without authorization. I also have evidence of plans to transfer property without her knowledge or consent. These are serious legal matters that could constitute elder fraud and exploitation. I suggest we discuss this calmly and rationally. The color drained from Melissa's face, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas and I have only been trying to help Eleanor. If anything, we've put money into this house with all the renovations. Thomas looked between us, confusion and betrayal warring on his face. Mom, what is this? Why would you involve a lawyer instead of just talking to me? The hurt in his voice nearly broke me, but I held firm, because I tried talking to you, Thomas, for weeks. But every time I expressed concerns, they were dismissed. I was painted as forgetful, overwhelmed, paranoid. I'm none of those things. I'm being systematically pushed out of my own home and my own life. I turned to Harold. I'd like to collect some of my things, and then we need to discuss next steps. What followed was one of the most painful hours of my life. Under Harold's watchful eye, I packed more clothes, important documents, and irreplaceable keepsakes into suitcases while Thomas alternated between angry accusations and pleading for understanding. Melissa maintained her performance of the concerned daughter-in-law, suggesting at one point that perhaps I needed professional evaluation, a comment that made Harold's eyebrows raise significantly. As I prepared to leave again, Thomas blocked the doorway to my bedroom. Mom, please, don't do this. We can work it out. His eyes were red, his voice breaking. For a moment, I saw my little boy again, and my resolve wavered. Thomas, I said gently, I love you more than anything in this world. But what's happening here isn't right. Melissa has been manipulating both of us, lying to each of us about what the other has said or agreed to. The kitchen renovation I never approved. The garden I never asked to have removed. The $5,000 taken from my account without my knowledge. Thomas shook his head, desperation in his eyes. There are explanations for all of that. Misunderstandings, Mom. Please, we're family. I reached out, touching his cheek like I used to when he was small. Yes, we are, and that's why this hurts so much. I need you to really look at what's been happening here. Not what Melissa tells you is happening, but what you see with your own eyes. I left with Harold that day, my car loaded with what I could carry, my heart heavier than the suitcases. Diane welcomed me back with open arms, insisting I stay as long as needed. The guest room is yours, she said firmly. No arguments. That night, my phone lit up with messages and calls from both Thomas and Melissa. I read them all but responded to none. Melissa's were all variations on concern for my mental state and offers to help find appropriate care options. Thomas's began with anger but gradually shifted to confusion and hurt. His final text of the night simply read, Mom, I don't understand what's happening, but I love you. Please talk to me. I cried myself to sleep reading that message, wondering if I'd lost my son forever. The next morning, Harold called with news. The bank has confirmed unauthorized access to your account, he said. They have security footage of the withdrawal being made by someone using your ID. They've launched a fraud investigation, and the police have been notified. I closed my eyes, relief and grief warring within me. This was the evidence I needed, proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I was being exploited. But it also meant confronting the painful reality that my daughter-in-law had stolen from me, and my son was either complicit or blind to her actions. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The police contacted me for a statement about the bank fraud. The bank froze the account where the stolen money had been deposited. Thomas and Melissa's joint account. Harold filed for an emergency protective order to keep them from accessing my house or finances while the investigation proceeded. And through it all, Thomas's messages became increasingly desperate. Mom, Melissa says there's been a misunderstanding about the money. She was trying to help manage your finances because you seemed overwhelmed. Please, let's just talk. I showed every message to Harold, who advised me to maintain minimal contact until we had the legal situation clarified. 10 days after I left my home, Harold called with news that changed everything. The police have the security footage from the bank, he said, his voice solemn. It was Melissa who made the withdrawal. Using your ID, she forged your signature on the withdrawal slip. They're pursuing charges. I sat down heavily, the phone shaking in my hand. And Thomas? I asked, dreading the answer. There's no evidence he was directly involved in the fraud, Harold replied carefully. But as her husband, he could be implicated in the use of the stolen funds. Ellie, there's something else. The police executed a search warrant at your house today. They found several documents in Melissa's possession: your social security card, birth certificate, other financial documents she had no right to have, and drafts of a power of attorney document with your forged signature. This goes beyond the $5,000. She was planning something much bigger. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This woman, this predator, had entered my life and systematically worked to strip me of everything: my home, my finances, my relationship with my son, even my legal autonomy, and she'd nearly succeeded. If I hadn't found those documents, if I hadn't acted when I did, I shuddered to think how far it might have gone. That afternoon, Thomas called. For the first time since everything happened, I answered. Mom, his voice cracked. The police were here. They took Melissa's laptop, documents. They're saying she stole from you. That she was planning to. He couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Thomas, I said softly. I tried to tell you. The line was silent for a long moment, just the sound of his ragged breathing. I didn't want to believe it. He finally said, she told me you were confused, that you needed help managing things, that all the changes were what you wanted but then forgot about. She said, his voice broke. She said you were showing signs of early dementia, that we needed to take control. Before you hurt yourself. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty and effectiveness, using the fear of dementia, something I'd watched my own mother suffer from in her final years, as a weapon against both me and my son. I'm so sorry, Mom, Thomas whispered. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was happening. The raw pain in his voice broke my heart. No matter how angry and hurt I was, this was still my child. Can I come see you? He asked, just to talk. Please. I closed my eyes, weighing Harold's caution against the need to see my son. Yes, I decided. But at Diane's house, not alone. He agreed immediately, the relief in his voice palpable. We arranged for him to come the following day, without Melissa. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, wondering if there was any way back from this, any way to rebuild the trust that had been so thoroughly shattered. Thomas arrived at Diane's house looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. When Diane opened the door, he barely acknowledged her, his eyes searching for me. I stood in the living room, my heart pounding. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the room, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. Then he crossed to me in 3 quick strides and fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around my waist and burying his face against me, like he used to do as a child after a nightmare. Mom, he sobbed. Mom, I'm so sorry. I held him, my own tears falling into his hair, feeling both the terrible pain of betrayal and the enduring love that had survived it. When he could speak again, Thomas told me everything, how Melissa had gradually isolated him from me, feeding him stories about conversations I'd supposedly had with her when he wasn't around, how she'd convinced him I was declining mentally, pointing to ordinary forgetfulness as evidence of something more sinister, how she'd framed every objection I made to their changes as confusion or resistance to necessary help. She had an answer for everything, he said brokenly, and I wanted to believe her because the alternative, that my wife was deliberately harming my mother, was unthinkable. He admitted their financial situation was dire. The lavish wedding, honeymoon, and lifestyle had been built on credit cards and loans. Melissa had convinced him that my house was the solution to their problems. She said we'd be helping you by moving you to assisted living, that you'd be safer, that the house was too much for you now. He looked up at me, shame in his eyes. I almost let her destroy you, Mom. How can you ever forgive me? I took his face in my hands, this grown man who was still in so many ways my little boy. Thomas, you were manipulated by someone who is very skilled at deception. Yes, you should have listened to me more carefully, should have seen what was happening, but she chose you specifically because you're kind and trusting, because you believe the best of people. I sighed deeply. The question now is, what happens next? Thomas straightened, wiping his eyes. Melissa was arrested this morning. The fraud charges, plus what they found at the house. They're taking it very seriously. She's facing multiple felony counts. He swallowed hard. I've contacted a divorce attorney. Whatever happens with the criminal case, I can't stay married to her. Not after this. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, police interviews, and painful conversations. Melissa was charged with elder exploitation, fraud, identity theft, and attempted coercion. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just what she'd done to me, but what she'd been planning. The drafted power of attorney documents would have given her complete control over my assets. The research on assisted living facilities focused not on quality of care but on places that required minimal family involvement. There were even notes on how to have me declared mentally incompetent. It was a systematic plan to erase me and take everything I had built over a lifetime. Most shocking of all was what the police discovered when they dug deeper into Melissa's background. This wasn't her first time. Under different names, she had done similar things to two other older women, both widows with adult sons. In one case, she'd succeeded in gaining control of a substantial estate before disappearing. In the other, the victim had died under circumstances that, while ruled natural at the time, now appeared suspicious in light of the pattern. She's a predator, the detective told me solemnly. She targets widows with adult sons, isolates them, gaslights them, and then takes everything. You're lucky you caught it when you did. Lucky, was that the word for it? Sitting in Harold's office 3 months after the wedding that had started this nightmare, I didn't feel lucky. I felt exhausted, violated, and still grieving the daughter-in-law I thought I had, the family I thought we would be. Thomas sat beside me, still living at Diane's brother's place where he'd moved after Melissa's arrest. He'd been to every meeting, every court appearance, determined to make amends for his unwitting role in her scheme. Harold shuffled the papers before him. The prosecutor is confident about the criminal case, he reported. Melissa has been denied bail given the flight risk and severity of charges. As for your house, he slid a document across to me. This deed confirms the property remains solely in your name. No changes were successfully made, though not for lack of trying on her part. I stared at the paper, a simple document that represented everything I'd nearly lost. My home, my independence, my dignity. And when can I move back in? I asked quietly. I'd been staying with Diane for months now, reluctant to return to the house that held such painful memories. Thomas spoke up. Mom, I've been working on the house, trying to put things back the way they were. Your garden won't be the same for a while, but I've replanted what I could. The kitchen. He hesitated. The renovation was already done, but I've found cabinet hardware similar to what you had before. And the furniture that was moved out, I've brought back from storage. Harold cleared his throat. Legally, the house is yours to return to any time. The protective order against Melissa remains in effect regardless of where you live. I nodded, thinking about what it would mean to go back, to reclaim my space, my life. Thomas reached for my hand. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to help you move back in, and maybe visit sometimes, start rebuilding. The hope and fear in his eyes broke my heart all over again. Despite everything, this was my son, my only child. Could I find a way forward that included him but protected me? The day I moved back into my house was both triumphant and strange. Thomas had been true to his word. My furniture was back, my photos restored to their places, even my kitchen as close to its former self as possible given the renovations. My bedroom was untouched, exactly as I'd left it, but still, the house felt different, tainted somehow by what had happened there. As I stood in the living room, running my hand over Richard's old armchair, Thomas watched me anxiously. Is it okay? he asked. I tried to get everything right. Smiled at him, a genuine smile despite the lingering sadness. It's perfect, Thomas. Thank you. He visibly relaxed, but maintained his distance, careful not to pressure me, to give me the space I'd requested. That night, after Thomas left to return to his temporary apartment, I sat on my porch swing, the same one where I'd first felt uneasy about Melissa all those months ago. The cool evening air carried the scent of the new plantings Thomas had put in, trying to restore my garden. Not the same, but a beginning. Inside was a house that was mine again, safe again. And somewhere across town was my son, finding his way back to himself after the devastation of Melissa's betrayal. Not the same, but a beginning there too. I thought about Harold's words at our last meeting. Ellie, you've shown remarkable strength throughout this ordeal. Many people in your situation would have been too ashamed or confused to fight back. You saved yourself. Had I simply been lucky enough to have friends like Diane, professionals like Harold, and a lifetime of independence that made me trust my own perceptions even when others tried to undermine them. As I rocked gently, watching the stars appear, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this experience define me or break me. I would rebuild my home, my relationship with Thomas, my sense of security on my own terms, and I would tell my story so that perhaps other women like me would recognize the warning signs before it was too late. 1 year later, I sat in a courtroom, my hands folded calmly in my lap as the judge prepared to announce Melissa's sentence. Thomas sat beside me, our relationship slowly healing through months of honest conversations, counseling, and his unwavering efforts to make amends. The courtroom was quiet as the judge shuffled his papers, looking sternly over his glasses at the woman who had nearly destroyed my life. Melissa looked nothing like the polished, confident bride who had whispered those chilling words at the altar. Her prison jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame, her sleek bob grown out and lank, her face stripped of makeup and bravado. The defendant has been found guilty on all counts, the judge began, his voice resonating through the hushed room. Elder exploitation is a particularly heinous crime, preying on those who deserve our respect and protection. This court views these actions with the utmost severity. He detailed the charges, the evidence, the pattern of predatory behavior revealed during the trial. Then he looked directly at Melissa. Before I pronounce sentence, Mrs. Anderson, is there anything you wish to say? She stood slowly, her attorney beside her. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw no remorse there, only cold calculation. Your Honor, she began, her voice softer than I remembered. I never intended any harm. I was only trying to help a woman who was clearly struggling with the challenges of aging alone. Any misunderstandings about finances or property were just that. Misunderstandings in a complicated family situation. The audacity of her continuing lies made me grip the bench tightly. Thomas placed his hand over mine, steadying me. The judge's expression didn't change. Mrs. Anderson, the evidence presented in this court tells a very different story. One of calculated exploitation and fraud. This court is not persuaded by your characterization of events. Then the judge did something unexpected. He turned to me. Mrs. Stevenson, I have read your victim impact statement, but if you wish to address the court directly before sentencing, you may do so now. I hadn't planned to speak. My written statement had detailed everything, the emotional trauma, the financial impact, the betrayal of trust. But suddenly, I found myself standing, Thomas's supportive hand on my elbow. I walked to the podium, facing not just Melissa but the entire courtroom. For a moment, I thought of all the women like me who never got this moment, who lost everything to predators like her, whose stories went untold. Your Honor, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. 1 year ago, at my son's wedding, Melissa whispered to me, today, she's gone. She meant me. She intended to erase me from my home, from my son's life, from my own story. I looked directly at Melissa, no longer afraid, but I'm not gone. I'm still here. And today, it's not my name on that property deed that matters most. It's the fact that I refused to be erased. I turned back to the judge. The crime isn't just about money or property. It's about trying to steal someone's dignity, independence, and place in the world. I asked the court to consider not just what was taken from me, but what could have been taken from countless others if this behavior had continued unchecked. When I returned to my seat, Thomas squeezed my hand, pride shining in his eyes. The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to Melissa. Melissa Anderson, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison for the crimes of elder exploitation, fraud, identity theft, and attempted coercion. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $45,000 to the victim for legal fees, property damage, and emotional distress. The gavel came down with finality, and court officers moved to take Melissa away. As they led her past our bench, she didn't look at me again. She didn't have to. We both knew who had won. Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in months. Thomas put his arm around my shoulders. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," he said quietly. "You were amazing in there." I leaned into his embrace, grateful for the slow rebuilding of trust between us. "We got through it," I said simply. "Together." And we had. Thomas had moved into an apartment nearby, was seeing a therapist to process his own trauma from Melissa's manipulation, and was gradually paying back his share of the financial damage to my home. Our Sunday dinners had resumed, not exactly the same as before, but perhaps more honest, more appreciative of each other. Today, I'm speaking to you from my garden. Yes, the one that Thomas and I replanted together. Now flourishing again with hydrangeas that are almost as blue as they used to be. My home is mine again, rearranged the way I like it, filled with the memories and mementos of a life well lived. I still volunteer teaching ESL, still have my book club and garden club, and now I also speak at senior centers about financial safety and recognizing exploitation. Because if my story helps even one woman recognize the warning signs before it's too late, then some good has come from this ordeal. I learned 3 vital lessons through all this that I want to share with you. First, trust your instincts. That uneasiness I felt from the beginning was trying to warn me. Second, document everything when something feels wrong. Those notes I kept saved me when it came time to prove what had really happened. And third, don't isolate yourself. My friendship with Diane gave me somewhere to turn when I needed help most desperately. If you're listening to this and something in my story resonates with your situation or someone you know, please reach out for help. You deserve to be safe in your own home, in your own life. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you have recognized the signs earlier? Could you forgive a loved one who had been manipulated into betraying you? These aren't easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But by sharing our stories, by refusing to be silenced or erased, we help each other find the way forward. If my story touched you or made you think differently about elder exploitation, please leave a comment below. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and resilience. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone being isolated, gaslit, or manipulated, please share this with them. Sometimes all it takes to begin healing is knowing you're not alone. From my garden to wherever you're listening, this is Eleanor Stevenson, still here, still standing, still growing, just like my hydrangeas, just like you can be too.